Good afternoon and welcome to today's webinar entitled Introducing the Diagnosis and Nurturing Self-Knowledge. This presentation is being hosted by the Family Support Center of New Jersey along with Autism Family Services of New Jersey and presented by Catherine Faherty, autism specialist, mentor, advocate, and talented author. While acknowledging the need for education around specific topics such as today's presentation, the Family Support Center of New Jersey also knows that families have many questions around their child's transition years. The Transition Matters website assists families and professionals in identifying resources to successfully transition your child or students with special needs to adulthood. Resources such as webinars, in-person workshops, and statewide and regional contact information are made available on this site. We encourage you to explore this site further and register for upcoming sessions. Before we begin, let's take a moment to go over how you can participate during today's web event. Everyone has their own control panel in the upper right corner of their screen that looks similar to the one here. Use the orange arrow to open or hide your control panel. To listen to the webinar, you have two audio options to choose from: mic and speakers, and telephone. If you can't hear while using your computer speakers, you can elect to use your telephone to listen to today's session. In order to maintain the best sound quality possible, all but the presenter will be muted throughout the webinar. If you have any questions or comments, you can submit them using the questions panel. All questions will be collected and answered at the end of the webinar as long as time allows. At this time, I would like to welcome Ms. Catherine Faherty.
Thank you, Yvonne.
You're
Nice to be here.
We're
And I'm just, do you see my first slide, the title slide?
We will in just a second, Catherine.
Okay.
Do you see a prompt to accept control of the screen?
Yes, I just clicked that. Show my screen. Do you see it yet?
Not yet.
Okay.
So I'm just going to take control of the screen back one time, Catherine, and then we'll
Okay.
change it back to you. Okay? Okay, so Catherine, we can see your screen now if you just want to start it from the first slide.
Okay. So, can you see the first slide?
Not yet, we can't.
Okay.
Perfect, we do see it now.
Good.
So there is a slight delay, just to let everyone know, but Catherine, please move forward with your presentation as you normally would.
Okay. Well, thank you very much. Thank you for inviting me to talk about introducing the diagnosis and nurturing self-knowledge. So this presentation will probably be about an hour, and then we'll have time for some questions. All right. We will just start. Let's see. So the slide's not advancing.
So Catherine, if you want to X out of your PowerPoint and then pull it back up.
Okay, wait, it is now. So do you see the second slide? It has a picture of my books.
We don't see that yet, but I will,
Okay.
if you want to move forward with the presentation, I'll let you know when it does pop up. So I do
Okay.
see the first screen. I do see your intro screen, so there's just a delay.
Okay.
Okay.
All right. Well, I do want everyone to know that throughout this presentation, there'll be a little, on some of the slides, you'll see a small icon of a cover of one of my books. And I have that there just to show, to reference the information. If people are interested in further information or more information about what I'm giving, then it helps them know what book to look for. So, have you? Is it moving on yet?
Not yet. It's not now. There it goes.
So
we're actually on the second screen
okay.
now with all the covers of the books.
Okay, and now I've already, so there are the books. I'll have that later also.
So now it's time to get started.
And now it says, let's get started. Wonderful. Okay, so let's do that then. So what we're going to talk about today is I'm going to try to give some answers and some considerations to the questions. Why? In other words, why tell my child about his or her diagnosis? When should I introduce this topic, and how to do it? So the thing is, I'm going to go back for a minute. The thing is, you know, talking to your child about the diagnosis of autism or Asperger's or autism spectrum is really a lifelong pursuit. Self-knowledge is a lifelong pursuit. It doesn't all happen in one discussion, of course. So what I'm going to try to cover today is some suggestions about how actually to introduce it, but then also some general information on how you can help nurture your child's self-knowledge and self-awareness throughout their growing up years. Okay. So why? We're going to talk about why first. And I'm just curious, do you see a slide with a big cloud on it?
Yes, we see it. We're okay.
Okay, I'm going to continue.
Okay,
You do, okay. So Dave Spicer, who is a gentleman on the autism spectrum I've known for many years, talked early on about conclusions he had as he was growing up, conclusions about himself. He was not diagnosed as a child, as many people in their 40s and 50s are now. They weren't diagnosed early on. But here are some of his early conclusions. There's something wrong with me. It must be my fault that I'm having so much trouble. No matter how hard I try, something goes wrong. I can't do things right. Everyone is mad at me, and other people can do the things I can't. Okay, so those were conclusions he drew about himself, minus because of not having accurate knowledge or information about himself, and neither did his parents or teachers or anyone else. Now, I'd like you to contrast that with a letter that a 13-year-old boy wrote. It was a boy I was working with many years ago, and he wanted to audition for a community theater production. Okay, he was very much into theater and screen plays and things like that. So here's an excerpt from his letter. Can you see the scroll there? To whom it may concern. I'm highly interested in the auditions for the role of Charles Wallace in your play based on Madeleine L'Engle's immortal classic, A Wrinkle in Time. I have chosen to audition for Charles Wallace because I find him to be like me, mostly because I have autism. You see, autism is when my brain seems to work on different terms than the average one. You may not be familiar with autism, but one of the gifts it has given me is an excellent memory. Okay. Now I'm just curious, can you see this slide?
You can, Catherine, yes.
You can?
Yes.
Okay, I'm moving on then. So, on page 13 of my book, Autism, What Does It Mean to Me, I think if someone never reads the whole book and only can read one page, this is the page I'd like the person to read, and I'd like the person to have this information, and that is that there are many ways. There are many different ways of being in the world, and autism is one way of thinking and being. That knowledge helps make it possible for awarenesses, such as a 53-year-old man, after being diagnosed, he commented, he said, "I found out that I'm a perfect example of me, a person with Asperger's, rather than a poor imitation of everybody else." It makes it possible for this woman, the illustrator of my book, Autism Wasn't Mean to Me, to illustrate the chapter about ways of thinking. And here you see her beautiful drawing of depicting patterned thinking and beautiful. It was in color. You'd see it was kaleidoscopic patterns emerging out of the heads of the two characters in her drawing. And here she is depicting a patterned type way of thinking. And you can see how beautiful and how precise it is. And she was able to make that illustration because of self-knowledge and, of course, her wonderful talent. Self-knowledge has enabled this young woman to carry an index card in her purse. This was when she was a young woman many, many years ago. She was concerned about taking public transportation, and what would she do if a police or a first responder was there, and she was nervous, and even if she didn't do anything wrong, and how her behavior would be misinterpreted. So together we made this index card that she carried with her, and together we listed the things about her, maybe the behavioral patterns about her that could be misinterpreted. You can see here, it says, under stress, to whom it may concern, I have autism. When I'm anxious, you might see behavior that could be misinterpreted. I'm very literal. Some of my responses may sound like a joke, but they aren't. I mean exactly what I am saying. And on and on. I'm not going to read the whole card. But self-knowledge made it possible for her to be able to be willing to and to want to carry a card like this to communicate more about herself to important people in her life. Autistic and Proud. Lydia Brown, who is an autistic blogger, and she's a student at Georgetown University and a part of Autism Self-Advocacy Network. Here you see her at a demonstration declaring her pride in being autistic. Okay. I'm going to say something before we move on about the languaging, first-person language and identity-first language. Because in most school systems I'm aware of, and especially among parents of younger children on the autism spectrum, prefer and in fact often insist on person-first language. And by that we mean the term like child with autism or person with autism, where the boy with autism, so the person is listed first. Now many autistic self-advocates, if you talk or you read what adult self-advocates say about languaging, many of them prefer identity-first language, and that would be characterized by saying, I am autistic, or I am an autistic person. And so, if you're on the internet, you know that sometimes there are pretty heated debates back and forth. But I think what's really important, as parents especially, and teachers, to just be aware of the viewpoints, read with an open mind, and bottom line is that your child, as he or she grows, should have the opportunity to understand the different implications of terminology and to make those choices for him or herself as he grows. So these are some articles that that can help you learn more about it. There's also in my book, I have several pages on these issues, person first and identity first language. Okay. Years ago when I started thinking and talking and figuring out, understanding about self-advocacy, I observed that, from my experience, that there were three components that made for successful self-advocacy. Okay, some specific communication skills, self-knowledge, and a receptive environment. And I kind of, instead of self-advocacy, I sort of define that as successful self-advocacy, where there's a better chance of creating the listening and responses that can work together with the person. Now, I'm being a little distracted because there's static in my phone, and I'm just asking, is there static in my presentation?
You sound great, Catherine. Please go ahead and continue.
Okay.
Thank you.
All right, I will continue. So, now, don't just take my word for it. You know, there's research out there, and I have it cited down here at the bottom of the slide by Michael Waymeyer, PhD, University of Kansas. There's research out there that shows that self-knowledge is essential for future self-determination. It makes it possible for people to recognize and identify and understand their needs and how to meet their needs, how to communicate their own interests and beliefs and values, and to accept individual differences. And there's a good bit of research about this. So let's get started here with self-knowledge. Just how in the world do you even introduce the diagnosis? When? Now we're going to talk about when. So we know that familiarity makes things easier for all of us, whether we're autistic or not. Something familiar is easier to process and understand and consider and think about than something unfamiliar. So because of that, let your child hear the word early on. By the word, I mean the word autism or Asperger's or whatever terminology that you use or that was used diagnostically with your child. You know, if your child reads, you know, have books laying around with the word autism on it. You know, just use the word autism as part of daily discussion. Okay, just have it be out there. Have it not be a word that's never heard by the child. One clear indication of when you should introduce the diagnosis to your child is indicated by your child. Okay, so for example, a family I worked with years ago, the child was 7 years old, and he came home from school one day and said to his mother, "Buy me a new brain." Okay, that clearly to his mother meant that he was feeling something different about how he thought or communicated or understood or was able, you know, his school relationships with the teacher and other students. He noticed there was something different, and he wanted a new brain. So that's just an example. You know, a child usually is not going to come out and ask, you know, you know, what's wrong or what's going on or why is this different about me? But if you're sensitive to it, you can kind of interpret some of those. I was just talking with a professional, a therapist actually in Cyprus yesterday on Skype, and she was explaining that her 11-year-old client was on the autism spectrum. The mother did not want her to just had concerns about when do I tell my child, do I even tell my child this information? And so the mother's waiting out in the lobby, and the therapist was having a discussion with the girl, just a regular session. They were working on things at school and you know, whatever they were working on in their therapy session. And the child, the 11-year-old girl, said to the therapist, "I need to know why I feel like this." And it was about some of the things that they were working on. And so the therapist said, well, just a minute. She went out in the lobby and said, "Your daughter is really asking," and that wasn't the first time. The daughter was just clearly asking, and the mother said, "Okay, tell her." And so the therapist went back in the therapy room. The mother did not want to be there. And the therapist used an example that I'm going to show in just a few minutes to you to help the child understand her diagnosis, or to introduce her diagnosis to her. And at the end of that, the girl said, "You knew this the whole time about me and you never told me?" So, you know, that it's often much more difficult for the parent than the child. Okay. My next door neighbor years ago was a skateboarder, and he had an accident. His parents took him to the emergency room, and the doctor said to him, and the doctor fixed him up, and the doctor said to him, well, were you wearing knee pads and shoulder pads and a helmet? And the boy said, well, no. And the doctor said to him, well, then you're just a statistic, another statistic of accidents. And the boy said to him, I'm not statistic, I'm autistic. Okay? So especially for younger children, especially before the teenage years, this is often no big deal. So that leads us to my suggestion that if, as a parent, if you know the diagnosis, if your child has been diagnosed before adolescence, before puberty, then that's really, really important to give the child this information before they reach puberty or go through adolescence. That's a harder time to be told that there's something different about you. No child likes to be different at that age, those ages. That's you know, a hard issue. We all know about that. So if you have the ability, or if you know the diagnosis before adolescence, then of course that's when you want to introduce it. Now sometimes you don't have that option. Many children are diagnosed in their teenage years. Well, then that's when they get to learn about it also. Okay, how do you do it? This is a big section, and that's going to take up most of the rest of the presentation. Number one, educate yourself. Okay, read books or blogs and listen to people on the spectrum. Listen to adults. Listen to autistic adults that can share their experiences with you. They're not all the same. Everyone speaks for themselves, or at least they should speak just for themselves. You can't, you know, speak for everyone just because you're autistic, everyone else that's autistic. But really get, you know, just with an open mind, hear that experience. Now, many times parents say, well, that's not like my child, or he's not like my child. Well, either is the parents like that child. Those of us that aren't on the autism spectrum, no matter how much goodwill and how hard we try and how much we learn and how many relationships we have with people with autism, innately, if we aren't autistic, we don't know that experience or that feeling from the inside. And so we need to keep being educated and keep listening. Yeah. And listen to your child. Now, that's easier said than done. You try to have a conversation with your child about how he or she thinks or feels about something, and many times, as we all know, that doesn't come easily or that's difficult. So I'm going to spend a few minutes talking about why that is and some suggestions about how to make it easier to really listen to your child. I'm going to suggest that you use visual strategies for communication, for self-expression, and for self-awareness. And to help your child begin to understand the meaning of the statement, what's true for me, and then to begin to be able to identify what's true for me and to communicate that to someone else. So let's talk a few minutes about auditory processing, verbal processing, language processing, however, you know, it's defined from whatever point of view. It's invisible, right? Here is the results of a Vineland Adaptive Behavior Scales for a 14-year-old boy. Okay, he was about to enter high school, and his mother came to me and said, let's do another Vineland just to see where he's at right now, because I don't want his teachers to misinterpret what he does or does not understand. So we got these results, and I want us to focus on the area of communication. So let's look at it one by one. In this particular test, which it's an adaptive behavior test, so you may or may not know, but adaptive behavior test, that's the examination that is scored by the therapist interviewing the parents or interviewing a caregiver or interviewing someone who knows the individual well. It's not a test where the child answers questions. It's a test that helps get a viewpoint of how the person does in real life, in real daily life. How does this person do with communication? So for written communication, this 14-year-old boy was very skilled, actually. He scored above the 18, 11-month-year-old level, which meant he did everything that that test looked at. And it was like writing letters or writing notes. This boy, in fact, loved to write essays. He liked to write. He was a writer. He enjoyed writing. It was easy for him. It was one of his skills, one of his talents. For expressive communication, the area of expressive communication on this test, it looked at how does this person do expressing himself verbally, like in conversation and typical talking, using speech to communicate. Okay, and you see here that the age equivalent was 8 years, 9 months old. Okay, so that's, that is much lower than his chronological age, although if you think of an 8-and-a-half-year-old boy, they talk with you. You can have conversations, they can express themselves verbally. Receptive communication on this particular test looked at how well did the person understand, okay, not express themselves, but understand when someone was talking with them. And you can see here that the age equivalent was 3 years, 11 months. And that's invisible. So here you are, a parent or a teacher, knowing that the child is autistic or on the autism spectrum, wanting to give some extra time and support. So as a teacher, you sit down and you talk with the child and you make sure he understands that assignment. And you might even break it down and describe it. And you spend some good time because you want to make sure he understands. And so you've talked to him about the assignment or about the issue. You finish talking, and you say to him, okay, do you have any questions? And it's likely that this child, who's autistic or on the autism spectrum, will probably say what? Will probably say no, because that's the right answer. When a teacher says, do you have any questions, the right answer is no. Also, we know what's a natural quality of communication among autistic people is that asking for help or asking questions is a pretty difficult thing to do. It's very open-ended. Do you have questions? Well, questions about what? There's millions of questions you could ask in the world, right? It's a difficult question to respond to. Do you have questions? And what are they? So the teacher says, do you have questions? The boy says no. And the teacher says, great. And so the boy walks away, and the teacher thinks, okay, I really did a good job of explaining this. He doesn't have any questions. He gets the assignment. But the boy walks away at possibly a 3-year, 11-month understanding of what was just discussed. Okay. In my book, Communication, What Does It Mean to Me? One of the suggestions I make for non-autistic people in a relationship with an autistic person is wait. Don't expect or request or demand an immediate verbal response from your communication partner with autism. Okay? This is what happens if we do that. If you routinely expect, request, or demand a response, you may unintentionally teach your child simply to say something, anything, even though it may not be authentic or true. So those of you that live with or work with a child that has kind of the same response to many questions, like okay, or no problem, or you betcha, or whatever, things like that. And if it's kind of routine, you do at one point begin to question, well, is it really no problem? Or, it's always the same answer. And I think that happens very naturally for a child that lives in a world that runs mostly on non-autistic communication style, where you need to respond in real time. in a conversation. You have to say something. We expect, and if you're a parent of an autistic child, you often work really hard on making the child learn to say something. So unintentionally, we may be teaching people to say something just because they're supposed to say something. Zosia Zaks, who is an autistic adult who wrote this wonderful book for adults, Positive Strategies for Autistic Adults, Life and Love. Half the book is about relationships, and half the book is about just aspects of daily life, organizational skills, shopping, all this kind of stuff. Really, really good book. She talks about this with this issue. She has an agreement with her partner who is not autistic. And so when they're having a discussion, and when the partner poses a question to Zosia, Zosia holds up a little sign that says processing. Now this is a really nice example of a win-win solution in a relationship when one person's autistic and one person's not. If the autistic person takes the time to not, or is not able or not ready or not, at that time not able to answer a question or to say a verbal response, what does a non-autistic person assume? You're talking with someone, say you're not autistic, you're talking with someone, you ask them a question, you say something, and they just don't say anything. But here are just some examples of how am I doing? My work is hard today, my work is easy today, my work's too easy today. The child has to mark what's true. And I do want to point out that sometimes a person may know that something feels not right, but they don't really know what it is or how it is or can't explain how they're feeling. So I've circled down here at the bottom of this individualized check-in. I don't know how I feel right now, but I'm doing okay. Or I don't know how I feel right now, but I'm not doing okay. Okay? So there's a little vote for regular daily check-ins. Chit-chat is not helpful. Okay? When you want to introduce a topic or talk about something, don't beat around the bush. And don't use phrases like beat around the bush unless you define it. Okay? Don't be indirect while you're trying to be polite. You know, in a typical mainstream way of communicating, it's commonly thought that it's more polite to sort of, especially with difficult topics or awkward topics, to kind of slowly introduce the idea or talk around the edges of it. But in communication with someone on the autism spectrum, and I actually think this is true for all of us, to be truly respectful and polite is to be direct and clear. Say what you mean what you say. And silence is okay. In fact, it's good and it's respectful and friendly. So teachers, parents, and therapists should offer and use methods of communication that allow children to communicate most easily and authentically. Okay. And both of my books down there, I have different lists of, here are some methods of authentic communication. And I've circled here pointing out that one of the options is to refer to this list together and choose a method to try. So if there's a topic that needs to be discussed or that there's a conversation that's going to happen, you can pull this sheet out and together both communication partners can pick which method are we going to use right now. Okay. Open-ended, broad, or vague questions may inhibit honest interaction. Okay. We need to help make communication more accessible and authentic. So as you listen to your child and you really try to understand what's going on with him or her, these questions, what do you think? What's wrong? How do you feel about this? What do you want to do? Why did you do that? That famous why did you do that? These may not be the easiest way, the most accessible way to help the person express themselves, especially as a child and especially if they haven't developed a lot of self-knowledge or ways of expressing themselves. Okay? Open-ended, broad, or vague questions will inhibit communication. So we need to, okay. So instead of saying, for example, why did you do that, you might want to give information and provide a method for identifying and expressing what's true for me. So here's an example. One page of one of my books is about hurting myself. And it gives information about what does it mean to hurt myself, okay, and why might it be an issue. And I will circle or highlight what's true for me. And then there are like multiple choice options where the person can read and identify what's true for them. You know, I think the beauty about multiple choice options is that many times, many people, non-autistic people and autistic people, may not be sure exactly of what's going on, but many times if you read it, you can read, yep, that's true, nope, that's not true. It's easier to identify. Okay. There's a lot of information in my books about that. Instead of saying, why won't you wear your glasses, here's an example of a communication form that I wrote years ago for a parent to use with her third or fourth grader child that was refusing to wear his glasses. Okay. Options about what's true for me about it. Okay. So I call these communication forms. In the communication form, you need to define the purpose of it. So you don't have to buy a book to use these. You just have to get your computer out and write. So at the beginning, you want to write, what's this form about? So here it says a communication form is a way to let other people know how the day is going for me, or whatever the topic is. People in my life may not know what I'm thinking or how I'm feeling unless I tell them. They do not know my thoughts or questions unless I tell them. Sometimes it's helpful to fill out a communication form instead of talking directly. I can fill out this form and give it to so-and-so. The person may want to get more information from me by phoning, emailing, or talking to me, or they may not need more information. So at the beginning of your communication form, especially if it's a new strategy, explain what is this thing all about? Why to use this? Then you need to give instructions how to use it. And here I've highlighted, it says, I will check the boxes next to the statements or questions that are true for me. I can check one more box. I can check more than one box if there are more things that are true for me. Okay, and then you list the options. I'm going to speed up a little bit here because I'm looking at the clock. Okay, all right, just more examples of communication forms, providing a method for identifying and expressing what's true for me. This is a communication form for IEP meetings to help someone authentically participate in their IEP. Instead of just inviting them to sit around the table, and you say to the person, so, how does this sound to you? Do you have anything to say? Broad, general questions are not helpful or accessible. But make a communication form that helps them identify and evaluate and communicate how they're doing in school, what ideas they may have. Okay. And the last of these strategies I want to share is the value of making lists and categorizing. This is going to help us go right to the question you all are waiting for. Categorizing helps the person organize their thinking, it helps self-knowledge, and it facilitates self-expression. This is how I figured this out. Years ago, there was a boy that I was working with, and his mother said, I don't know what's going on with him at school. Now, this boy is very, very verbal. He was functioning way above his chronological age with math and reading and all these kind of skills. So he was a talker. He could talk easily about things, or he talked a lot about things. But all of a sudden, for a week in school, he was throwing things and being angry, and then he was shut down, and people kept saying to him, use your words, right? That famous statement, use your words, tell us what's going on, and he wasn't. So I was working with him, and I knew that if I tried talking with him, it was going to work the same way it worked for everyone else, which was that he just wasn't going to respond because it wasn't working. So I said to him, no talking. And I drew a line down the middle. I made two categories, things that make me angry, things that help me calm down, and I made these blank boxes. I wanted him to know we weren't going to sit there forever. He just had to fill out these boxes, and we were not going to talk. I handed him the pen, and right away he filled in on the what makes me angry side, when people hurt me, when people shove me, when people call me names. On the other side, things that help me calm down, he wrote nothing, and then he colored it in, and then he wrote at the end, being by myself. So categorizing, making lists and categorizing is a really wonderful way to help people, to help a person's own ideas and thoughts be accessible to themselves. Because I don't think, my guess is that one reason he couldn't express himself, besides being anxious and stressed about this, was because maybe his own thoughts about this weren't organized. Maybe it was hard for him to identify exactly what was going on until it was structured in this very logical manner. Okay, so what I'm going to do now is give you a run through sort of some suggestions about 10 guidelines for telling your child. Actually, I'm going to show you one of those suggestions about using categorizing and using lists. You can read my whole article if you go to my website. There's a free download, and you can find it under articles, which is under publications. Okay, so you don't even have to take notes here. It's all there. So you get a piece of paper for each person in your family, and you might want to add a friend or so. So you have a piece of paper. You're sitting with your child. Other family members could be there also, or you could do this with a therapist if you want to, and you have several pieces of paper on the table, and each piece, so this represents here in front of you one piece of paper. You draw a line down the middle, you write strengths and challenges, and here you write, if you're the mother, you write your name, or mama, or mother, or whatever, mommy, whatever word you use, okay? And you define strengths as things, talents or skills, things that feel natural, easy, or enjoyable. Okay, and there we are. I've just written together, as a family, we've written down the strengths for me as a mama, which is dancing, cooking, laughing, and writing. Okay. Under challenges, you define that as things that need more practice or more time to accomplish, things that may feel difficult or uninteresting. Okay. And here we are, cleaning, sewing, baking cookies, and mathematics. Okay. Those are the challenges for this mama. Then you write one for another person in the family. It may be daddy. You write their strengths and their challenges. And everybody can think about this together, that person as well as other people. You write one for grandma, grandpa, sister, aunt, whoever. You might just do 2 or 3 people. You can do as many as you choose. Maybe a friend or a classmate. And then you get to your child, the child for whom you want to introduce the idea of the diagnosis of autism. You write your child's name at the top, just like you did everyone else. You draw a line down the middle, and together you write what that child's strengths are. And for this particular example, for this one girl, I wrote that she knows a lot about fish. She's really good with spelling. She's good with animals. She can make great puppet shows, and she likes to laugh. She's a good laugher. Under challenges for this particular child was mathematics, tasting new food, playing with other girls, and tying her shoes. Okay? You define those together. Then what you do is on the strengths section, the strengths side, you write autism. And you say, you know, autism, there's a lot of kids in the world that are autistic. And that's one of the things that helps you remember a lot of things about fish, because autistic people can remember facts really good about things they're interested in, like you are about fish. Okay, and you might identify some of the strengths and relate that to autism, or talk about some of the qualities of autism that relate to your child's strengths. And then on the challenges side, you do the same thing. You write autism on the challenges side, and you can say, you know, some of these things like tasting new food. Boy, a lot of autistic kids, or a lot of kids with autism, don't like to taste new food. It's kind of yucky for them, just like it is for you. Okay, and so in this way, you introduce the word autism, or whatever word you choose. You also relate it, obviously, to a person's strengths and their challenges. You also have shown them how everybody else has strengths and has challenges. Another option that sometimes, depending on the age of the child or the interests of the child, you can do some research. There's a lot of interesting books and or research out there on the internet about individuals that are alive now or individuals that aren't alive anymore and autistic characteristics they had. And the one that's most commonly cited is Albert Einstein, but there's many others. Okay. Self-knowledge and autism and self-knowledge, they don't have to be exactly the same thing, right? So in my book, I have many, many pages that talk about self-knowledge, autism and self-knowledge, you know, for the older child, not for a 6 or 7 or 8-year-old, but maybe for a 10, 11, 12, 13 or older person. It talks about what is self-knowledge. And why would it be interesting or important to know about autism related to my self-knowledge? Okay, how else? Now, so we're back to strategies of how do you communicate? How do you continue the discussion? And I did allude and I mentioned that conversations by typing is autism friendly. It's quiet, it allows more time, and it creates a more relaxed pace of communication. For those of us that are more used to talking in conversation, it helps us slow down. Okay. At first, it will be challenging to take turns typing on a conversation. But after a while, it may be something that even non-autistic people may enjoy doing. For the autistic person, it's much more accessible many, many times. You know, maybe not all the time, but I suggest that you experiment with easy, non-emotionally charged topics. Okay, so it becomes a familiar method for both of you. So when you really have to talk about something, and it might be kind of a hard thing to talk about, or if people are stressed out or anxious or overwhelmed, then the method, typing back and forth, is already familiar. Okay, so at the beginning, or just any time, you can schedule a regular time for typing conversations, once a day or whatever works for the person in their life. Okay. I do want to point out that this should count. This is an accommodation. This can be listed as an accommodation in school, okay, to make available typing time for communication. Okay. How else do we help a person learn about the diagnosis? Well, we provide facts, and I just have a little Google thing here, but facts. Okay, how many people in the world are autistic? How do you figure out how many people in your county or your city or your country are autistic? You can see here this is an older statistic. It's 88. Okay. Okay. Oh, and then here the example of using a famous person, their strengths and their challenges. Okay. Remember to be clear, direct, and literal in how you communicate. Just one example of this is a gentleman I know years ago went to see a psychiatrist, and because he was very anxious and he had some behaviors that his wife was concerned about. So the psychiatrist wanted to prescribe medication. Actually, the psychiatrist also referred him on to get an autism evaluation. But before he left the office, the psychiatrist wanted to prescribe medication to help alleviate his anxiety. And so the psychiatrist asked him many questions so he would know if he needed to rule out any medications. There's a medication that would make tics be worse if you have a tic disorder. So one of the questions the psychiatrist asks this gentleman is, do you have a problem with tics? And the man said no. What happened was he was prescribed this medication, and the tics he had got worse and worse, and there were some very serious consequences. He could not work after that because of the increase in tics. Now, that doesn't make sense because I just told you that the man said no. But the truth is the man was thinking and has felt that he doesn't have a problem with tics. It doesn't really bother him that he has tics, that he's had them since he was a kid. So what was the issue here? Why was there a miscommunication? What if the doctor wanted to know if this person had tics? He should have left that out, a problem with tics. If he asked, do you have tics, then the man would have said yes. That's just and that's an example. Nobody could have foreseen that. Number one, the man didn't even know he had a diagnosis. He was going to get a diagnosis of autism. Psychiatrists didn't know that. That's a question the psychiatrists ask all the time. But children and adults on the spectrum have taught me that it's imperative to communicate most clearly about things that are the most difficult to understand. Okay. I'm going to move on here. There's many pages in my book that talks about autism and talks about it in very clear and precise ways. How else do we help someone understand their diagnosis of autism and help understand how themselves as autistic is by explaining the behavior of others, okay, of other people out there, other children in the classroom, other people in their family. Okay, I'm going to read this one very important page to you. Eye contact. Eye contact means looking directly at someone's eyes. Many children listen and understand better when they look directly into the eyes of the person who's talking. Most children make eye contact when they're paying attention to someone talking to them. That's why people think, if I make eye contact, I'll understand them better. When I don't make eye contact, they think I am not paying attention. This is true for many children, but it may not be true for many autistic children. I will circle or highlight what's true for me. And then there are multiple choice statements that the child can identify which of these are true for him or her. Okay. And at the bottom it says, if someone says, look at me when they want my attention, and if I have difficulty doing it, I may say, I am paying attention. Right now I can listen better when I look away. The journey of self-understanding allows a person to be able to even know what to self-advocate about. To identify and understand things about themselves has to come first before they can communicate it to someone else. Okay. So because of time, I am going to move quicker. I took a poll in 1998 with adults that were in a social group that I ran, and I asked them, if you remember back when you found out about autism, what would some questions have been? What were some questions that you might had? And just to see if anyone could help me out here. And the questions were sort of typified or categorized by these type of questions. Is there something wrong with me? Am I the only one like this? Isn't everyone like me? Are there other people like me? Okay? I think it's really interesting that many times in the media and in books and in strategies, autistic people are characterized as not being interested in social interaction or social things. But it's really interesting that all except for one of these questions is very social. Okay, am I the only one like this? That implies that I want to know about other people. Isn't everyone like me? Are there other people like me? Those are all social related issues. Okay. And that's leading me to the last suggestion I have about how to help your child understand themselves and autism, and as they grow, have greater self-awareness, self-knowledge, is to locate or organize social groups and to meet other people. These are not social skills groups, although sometimes in social skills groups, neat things can happen, like friendships and getting to know others. But the main purpose of the group is not to, quote unquote, learn social skills. It's to meet other people. One gentleman, one of the email polls I took years ago was, what do you like about the social group? This is what he wrote. I like being a part of the social group because I get mail, the schedule and the reminders. Also, because of my membership, I have dates on my calendar. And the other group members know me. If I show up with a new coat, someone will probably say, you got a new coat. It's like having a history. The other members know me and remember things about me. There's a memory within the group of what we do and what we've done throughout the time we've known one another, a link or a bond, or perhaps it's what's called friendship. Linda Krieger Silverman says, according to the dictionary, socialization is the ability to adapt to the needs of the group. Social development, on the other hand, is not the pressure to adapt, but a deep, comfortable level of self-acceptance that leads to true friendship with others. I'm going to insert here, I'm going to read a few pages excerpt from my book, because it's clear to me that there is an overabundance of information for autistic children and adults on how to be social or how to be socially appropriate. And it's always, I wrote here it's almost always, but pretty much it's always from a non-autistic perspective, how to be social. Stimming, how I do it. Stimming is a short way of saying self-stimulation. Everyone stims sometimes, but some autistic people may stim more often than others. It may feel good. It may help me feel better, focus, relax, or something else. I'll circle or highlight how I stim. So there's choices here where the child can identify different ways that he or she stims. Okay, some stimming may hurt my body. In that case, it's called self-injurious behavior. Information about self-injurious behavior can be found later in this chapter. So now we continue about stimming. Why I do it. It serves a purpose. I may not always know why I stim, but this list contains some possible reasons for stimming. Okay, and then I will check or highlight what may be true for me. And there's lots of choices of why I may stim, including, I don't know why I stim. Okay. Understanding stimming. Most non-autistic children my age do not stim as much as I do. They don't flap their hands or rock or spin around very often or stim in other ways. But stimming is natural to me. Other people are sometimes surprised or bothered when they see me stim. It may bother them because it makes me look different from what they expect to see. Maybe they worry others will make fun of me, or they could be uncomfortable or embarrassed by seeing me do something unexpected and different. This is why they tell me to stop. Sometimes parents or teachers or therapists say quiet hands when I'm flapping or stimming with my hands. But the truth is, I might be a person whose hands are flappy or loud. When other children and adults learn more about autism and stimming, it might not bother them so much. They may realize that stimming is not a bad thing. They might notice that they stim too. They may play with their hair, chew on the inside of their cheeks, tap their fingers on the table, or fill it in. Maybe sometimes my teacher or my parent or friend will announce aloud to everyone, time for stim break, everyone, and then the whole class or the whole family jumps up, flaps, spins, or stims in other ways. Stimming, freedom for everyone. This might be fun for all of us. Do I want to have stim breaks like this? Circle what's true for me. Yes, no, or not sure. Okay. The last thing I want to say before questions is that under the category of how, is that's really important, obviously, for a person to learn that it's okay to be who they are, period. And I'm going to end with another excerpt from Jade McWilliams. She has given me permission to show some of her comics, and here's one about this topic. It's a few pages long. I am shy and quiet by nature, but I think after years of feeling subhuman and misunderstood, I became even more fearful of people than I might have otherwise been. But I had even a bigger problem. My constant fear and self-policing, my impossible remolding of myself to an unattainable normal, it all added up to one thing. I really did not understand myself. I did not know how to be authentic. I longed to be me, but I was afraid of it. I was a stranger in my own world. How could I find an honest and feasible way to be without self-knowledge or self-understanding? Could I really be the person who gets to use typing to communicate instead of talking, and sometimes doesn't talk at all? Who squeaks, flaps, and jumps when excited? Who likes to rock and watch the same DVDs over and over again? Is much more comfortable with fictional people rather than actual people? Has problems saying anything at random about her inner life, but does have one? Turns out I could be all of those things. Turns out that by learning about my innate way of being, I could begin to find some of that balance. I could be kinder to myself. I could learn to live in ways that truly worked for me rather than against me. I could start to truly feel safe and find my place in the world. Before, I heard, be yourself, but I also heard, don't rock, speak up, look at me, no biting. It's so confusing. How do I know how to be? I couldn't understand it at all. Now I say, I will be me. I am learning what that means all the time. It is a process. I don't have to be normal. I am learning to be safe, which is way better than normal. But best of all, I get to say things like, what's the big deal about hand biting or flapping or rocking? Those things are okay to do. It's thrilling to write those words. No quiet hands. Perhaps the hero of the story is ASD. The more I learn about autism and me, the more I forge a better, healthier, and happier way of being. Being autistic is central to my identity because it gives me the context to understand my human experience. I am free from seeing myself as weird, broken, and defective. I don't have to hide and hate my differences. I am proud to be autistic. It makes sense. I'm Jade. I'm autistic. It's part of my way of being, and the world needs all kinds of people in it. Learning about autism and me is one of the best things that ever happened to me. Okay, and as I said, Jade is an autistic activist, a self-advocate, who we may be hearing much more from in the future. Here is one of the pages and one of the last chapter of one of my books, Fitting In or Being My Unique Self. And it describes what does it mean to fit in, and what does it mean to be one's unique self. Okay. I want to thank you. Before I take questions in just a minute, I do want to say that the black and white illustrations that you saw were by Thomas Johnson, and they are the beautiful illustrations in the book Understanding Death and Illness and what they teach about life. Okay. And also that one of the things I do is I mentor therapists, teachers, and other professionals worldwide. And you can contact me via my website if you're interested in that or asking about it. And that here's the last slide here, just to remind you where the information I share with you today can be found in my books. And so now, let me see what time it is. Oh, good. We have about 20 minutes or so, 15, 20 minutes if there are any questions. Thank you very much. Yes?
Okay, great, Catherine. Thank you again for the information you provided us today. We do have a couple questions that came in.
Okay.
Okay, so the first is, how can I help others to understand that my child has feelings even though he is nonverbal?
Well, you know, like I said, it's at the very beginning of my suggestions about how I can help my child understand him or herself. That first suggestion about educating myself and listening and reading and learning from other people with autism who can express it, I would really suggest that you help the important people in your child's life get information from adults, autistic adults. There's an incredible, it's an incredible book called Loud Hands, Autistic People Speaking. And it's published by the Autism Self-Advocacy Network, ASAN. And it's a collection of essays or poems or information written by a variety of autistic adults with very varied experiences. And these are adults that, for the most part, many of them were not diagnosed as children. And some of them are nonverbal. In other words, they communicate by typing almost exclusively. And they share very candidly their experiences, including emotional reactions, emotional experience, their emotional life in this book. There are also bloggers on the internet that with autism, and some who are identified as non-speaking or nonverbal. That, to me, would be a very direct way of broadening the people who care and need to know about your child, broadening their awareness about the inner life and the rich inner life of all people, whether or not they can express it or not in words.
Thank you so much for those tips. Very helpful. And another question that came in, Catherine, was, how do I effectively introduce the autism diagnosis to my other younger, typically developing child?
Yeah, how, so younger than the sibling with autism. I think I would, the suggestion I made about the pieces of paper and the list of strengths and challenges, you can do that together as a family. So the younger child is can be a part of that, and make sure you communicate in ways that that child understands. But everyone has strengths and challenges. Autism is a part of the autistic sibling strengths and challenges. And that can be an ongoing experience. So you initially sit down and you make these lists, or you draw pictures of strengths and challenges together, and you can maybe leave them posted up on the wall, and you can add to them. It can be something that you continue to do for a while. So let's say something comes up where one of the siblings, one of the children, doesn't matter who, whether they're autistic or not, does or says something, and you might add something on the strengths column or add something in their challenges column. And in that way, all the siblings can see how everyone has strengths and challenges and how autism is a part of one of the particular siblings. So I think it's you can make it be an ongoing activity, but that's really a good one for all siblings, not just for the child with autism.
Thank you so much. And actually, a couple attendees were wondering if they were interested in, learning more about your publications and the information that you have available. Would they be able to order those publications on your website?
You can't order them on my website, but on my website I link to, you can order them on Amazon or on the publisher's website, which is Future Horizons. It's actually FHautism.com. FHautism.com, stands for FutureHorizons.com. You can order the books there or through Amazon, and they're easy to find. So.
Oh, okay, perfect. And as far as the questions are concerned, I believe we went through them all. Did you have any last bits of information to add before we conclude our session?
Well, I think for right now I've said what I came here to say. And I want to thank you for inviting me, and I hope this is helpful for people. Thank you very much.
Well, it certainly was. Thank you again, Catherine. And on behalf of the Family Support Center of New Jersey, I would like to thank all of you for attending this session. Again, thank you, Catherine Faherty, for sharing your knowledge with us. And this concludes our webinar. Have a wonderful rest of your day, everyone.
Okay, thank you.
Catherine.
Okay, bye-bye.
Bye-bye.